Hi, I'm Larry Taylor, and I'm just sharing from my heart. I don't have a really strong agenda. This is not a Bible study. Just sharing things that are on my heart. I've been um, personally thinking about and at times struggling with anger inside that comes from um, things that happened in my early childhood, mostly. Some of it comes from things that are more contemporary that have happened or are happening to people that I really care about deeply, things that are unjust, not fair. And our natural response to injustice is a sense of indignation, a sense of anger, because if we are followers of Jesus, then within our hearts we long, we ache for justice. I think that's part of what Paul's talking about in Corinthians when he says that all of creation is groaning with us, longing for the manifestation of the children of God, longing for the time when all things will have been made new. We know that God is at work in the world today. God's at work in us. And we know that God is in the process of making all things new. But we also are very aware that it's not there yet. And so we long for that. We have this innate longing for righteousness, justice. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst after righteousness, who hunger and thirst after justice. Jesus there in the Sermon on the Mount isn't just talking about internal, personal holiness. He's also talking about justice in the society as a whole. So there are things that happened to me when I was a child, some of them when I was a very, very young child, which hurt me deeply, and we have a tendency, more than a tendency, I think we're built in such a way that when we are hurt profoundly, so much so that we can't deal with the hurt, then our minds, our inner being covers that hurt with anger, and anger becomes this, as a friend of mine says, a ball of energy inside of us, and we don't know what to do with that energy. At least oftentimes I don't know what to do with that energy. I know that I don't want to hold it in my heart because it's not just a ball of energy, it's almost like a ball of fire. It eats away at me, it destroys, it's spiritual poison. It can create a root of bitterness, which then can grow and choke out all of the fruit of the Spirit, the love, joy, peace, long-suffering, gentleness, goodness, faithfulness, meekness, self-control. So, because of injustice in people that I love, or happening in the lives of people that I love, because of deep inner hurts within myself, I find myself struggling with anger, and you can see this on a larger societal level. Our African American sisters and brothers have been suffering injustices, all of them, suffering injustices their entire lives. Some of those injustices slight, some of them more major. And it goes back generations. Jim Crow segregation, mass incarceration, and convict leasing, and slavery. Our indigenous sisters and brothers have been suffering from injustice ever since European settlers came to the land with guns and smallpox and stole their lands and betrayed the treaties, introduced them to intoxicating beverages. And so there's generation after generation after generation of injustice piled on top of injustice, piled on top of injustice. And then we come up to the modern time, and here's a African American person or a Native American person, and in their daily lives they're suffering injustices just because of their ethnicity. And then in the news is a very nonchalant looking white police officer kneeling on the neck of an African American man, pleading for his life, and continuing to kneel there until he's dead. And some people are surprised that violence erupts. I'm surprised that more violence hasn't erupted. I think the violence, comparatively speaking, has been very minimal, considering the intergenerational pain and hurt and layers of injustice, and the anger has built up for generation after generation, and then suddenly it's triggered and an explosion takes place. And that happens on a societal level. It can also happen in our hearts. I don't want to explode. I don't want a root of bitterness. I don't want to be an angry person. For one thing, I know enough about physiology to know that anger is physically poisonous to our systems. But even more importantly, it's spiritually poisonous to our relationship. And so, I don't have any answers, but I've been struggling with this anger, and what I've recently seen, I think, is that the anger is not, rather than seeing it as a sin and feeling guilty about it and crying out to God, oh, I'm so sorry, I have this anger in my heart, I'm a rotten person for having an anger in my heart. I'm beginning to see that it's the natural energy, that ball of energy again, it's the natural energy that results from deep-seated hurt. And in that sense, it's normal. It's something that every hurt human being, to one degree or another, experiences. It's certainly profoundly true in those individuals who were abused as children. I was not, but so true with them. So I no longer feel guilty about being angry. I no longer feel guilty about having a sense of indignation at injustice. There are things that aren't right. Some of them are big global things like institutionalized racism. Others are more specific. Injustice happening in the life of someone that I love, or looking back at injustices in our own lives. So, what do you do with that ball of energy? Something that I have just recently been trying is to sit down and write a letter to a person who's hurt me, but nobody's ever going to see that letter except me and God. God and I. God and me. I can talk. And getting out of my head and just putting down, for me, just putting down on paper the raw anger that's there, with all the curse words that come with it. And then taking that and getting alone someplace and reading it, expressing it out loud, and letting the emotions flow. And then what I did was, after that, I burnt the letter. And as it burnt, I said aloud, I choose to let go of this ball of energy. I choose to let go of this anger. I choose to forgive. I don't feel like forgiving, but I choose to forgive. And I think maybe that's hopefully the beginning of the end of that poison within. That's my thought for today.